in the vast, swirling darkness of space, where stars ignited and died in silent grandeur, a new world was taking shape. It began as a whisper of dust, tiny particles of rock and ice drifting in the void, drawn together by the invisible hand of gravity. Over eons, these fragments collided, clung, and fused, growing from grains into boulders, from boulders into mountains, until at last a molten sphere emerged from the chaos. This was Earth in its infancy, a roiling, seething mass of liquid rock, its surface cracked and split by the fury of its own creation. Volcanoes erupted in towering plumes of fire, spewing molten lava across the landless expanse. Meteorites, remnants of the solar system's violent birth, rained down in fiery streaks, each impact sending shock waves through the young planet. The sky burned red with the glow of superheated rock, and the air, what little there was, reeked of sulfur and ash. Yet even in this hellish cradle, change was stirring. As the bombardment of space debris slowed, Earth's surface began to cool. The first solid crust formed, thin and brittle, like a scab over a wound. Beneath it the mantle churned, restless and alive, shaping the land with its unseen currents. Then came the rains. Water, locked away in comets and icy asteroids, was delivered to Earth in a deluge that lasted millennia. Steam hissed as it met the scorched rock, condensing into vast, churning oceans. The first true seas spread across the planet's surface, swallowing valleys and drowning plains. The sky, once choked with dust, began to clear, revealing the pale light of a young sun. And so, from fire and ice, from chaos and time, Earth was born, a world of water and stone, waiting for the next chapter of its story to unfold. The oceans of early Earth were nothing like the tranquil blue expanses of later ages. They were hot, acidic, and thick with minerals, a turbulent broth stirred by volcanic vents that spewed plumes of superheated water into the darkness. Yet in these inhospitable depths, something extraordinary was happening. Molecules danced in the scalding currents, colliding, breaking apart, and recombining in endless permutations. Among them were the building blocks of life, amino acids, lipids, nucleotides, forged in the crucible of the vents or delivered from the heavens by meteorites. They swirled in the mineral-rich waters, clinging to the porous rock like microscopic wanderers seeking shelter. Then, one day, a spark. A chance encounter between molecules led to the formation of a simple structure, a membrane that could enclose and protect, a fragile bubble in the chaos. Inside, chemical reactions began to self-sustain, drawing energy from the vent's heat and the surrounding soup of compounds. It was not yet alive, not in the way we understand life, but it was the first step toward something greater. Over millennia, these protocells grew more complex. Some developed the ability to replicate, passing on their rudimentary blueprints to new generations. Others specialized in harnessing energy, becoming more efficient in the harsh environment. The vents, once mere fissures in the ocean floor, became cradles of innovation, their mineral chimneys acting as scaffolds for these early experiments in existence. But the world outside the vents was unforgiving. Ultraviolet radiation from the young sun lashed the surface waters, and the atmosphere, still devoid of oxygen, offered no protection. Life, if it was to survive, had to adapt or retreat. And so it did, deeper into the ocean's embrace, where the vent's warmth and chemistry provided a refuge. Slowly, imperceptibly, the first true organisms emerged. Single-celled and simple, they thrived in the darkness, feeding on the vent's bounty. They were the pioneers, the ancestors of all that would come after. And though their world was small, their legacy would one day stretch across the planet. The march toward complexity had begun. The seas of Earth, once silent and still beneath their sunless expanse, now teemed with a riot of life unlike anything the planet had ever seen. The long reign of microscopic organisms had given way to something far more spectacular, an explosion of diversity so sudden and vast that the oceans seemed to reinvent themselves overnight. This was the Cambrian explosion, a burst of evolutionary creativity that filled the ancient waters with creatures both wondrous and bizarre. The first signs of change came in the shifting sands of the ocean floor. Tiny worm-like creatures, some no thicker than a thread, began to burrow through the sediment, leaving behind intricate trails like the scribbles of an unseen artist. Others, armored in delicate shells, clung to rocks or drifted in the currents, filtering nutrients from the water. These were the pioneers of a new age, the architects of ecosystems yet to come. But it was the predators that truly transformed the seas. Among the most fearsome was Anomalocaris, a nightmarish hunter with a segmented body, multiple grasping appendages, and a circular mouth lined with serrated plates. It prowled the shallows, its bulbous eyes scanning for prey. Soft-bodied trilobites, perhaps, or unwary worms. Wherever it moved, the water stirred with panic, for this was the first true apex predator, a creature designed to kill. Other oddities flourished alongside it. Hallucigenia, with its spiky back and strange, stilt-like legs, crawled across the seabed, its purpose as enigmatic as its appearance. Opabinia, a many-eyed oddity with a claw-tipped proboscis, darted through the water like a creature from a dream. The seas had become a gallery of evolutionary experiments, each organism a testament to nature's boundless imagination. Yet for all their strangeness, these creatures shared one crucial trait: complexity. For the first time, life had developed hard shells, articulated limbs, and sophisticated senses, tools that allowed it to exploit new niches, defend against enemies, and, in time, reshape the world itself. The stage was set for an even greater transformation, one that would reach beyond the water's edge. The Cambrian seas were a battleground of survival, where every advantage, no matter how small, could mean the difference between life and oblivion. And among the most revolutionary innovations of this era was the eye. Before the Cambrian, the world was sensed, not seen. Organisms navigated by touch, by chemical trails, by the faint vibrations of currents. But then, in a burst of evolutionary ingenuity, light became a language. The first eyes were simple, patches of light-sensitive cells that could distinguish shadow from brightness, allowing creatures to detect predators or prey. But in the arms race of survival, simple was not enough. Eyes grew sharper, lenses formed, and soon the seas were filled with hunters that could see, truly see, their quarry. Anomalocaris, already a terror of the deep, became even deadlier. Its bulbous compound eyes, some of the most advanced of the time, allowed it to track movement with eerie precision. Trilobites, those armored survivors of earlier ages, developed their own sophisticated vision, their calcite lenses refracting light in a way no organic eye could. The ocean floor, once a realm of blind groping, became a stage of pursuit and evasion. But sight was only one weapon in this escalating war. Some creatures, like the spiky hallucigenia, bristled with defenses, their bodies a fortress of spines against hungry jaws. Others, like the enigmatic Wewaxia, wore coats of overlapping scales, each one a tiny shield against the ever-present threat of predation. The evolutionary pressure was relentless: adapt or be devoured. And then there were the builders, burrowing creatures once content to simply tunnel through mud, began reshaping the seabed itself. Their excavations oxygenated the sediment, creating new niches for other organisms to exploit. The ocean floor, once barren, became a labyrinth of life, tracks, trails, and burrows weaving through the muck like the threads of a vast, living tapestry. Yet for all its chaos, the Cambrian explosion was not without order. Ecosystems balanced on knife edges, predators and prey locked in an endless dance. The first food webs formed, intricate and fragile, each species a link in a chain that stretched from the smallest detritus feeder to the most formidable hunter. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the frenzy slowed. The seas still teemed, but the wild experimentation of the Cambrian gave way to refinement. The survivors, the swift, the armored, the cunning, had carved out their places in the world. But Earth was not done with surprises. The next chapter of life's story would unfold not just beneath the waves, but beyond them, onto land. For eons the continents had lain barren, vast expanses of rock and dust, scoured by wind and rain, untouched by life. The oceans teemed with creatures, but the land remained a silent, lifeless expanse, its only movement the slow grind of erosion and the occasional ripple of a dust devil twisting across the plains. Then something changed. It began at the water's edge, where the tides lapped at the rocky shores. Here, in the thin, wet margins between sea and land, a quiet revolution took root. The first pioneers were not swift or fearsome, but humble and tenacious. Algae and simple mosses, their forms barely more than a green film clinging to damp stone. They were the first to brave the harshness of the terrestrial world, their existence a fragile defiance of the sun's glare and the dry, unyielding air. At first their hold was precarious. Without roots or vessels to carry water, they relied on the constant kiss of mist and spray. But they adapted. Some developed waxy coatings to slow the escape of precious moisture. Others curled inward when dry, only to unfurl again when the rains returned. They were small, unnoticed things, yet their presence marked the beginning of a transformation. With each passing generation, these early land dwellers grew bolder. Their tendrils crept further inland, following the veins of moisture in the rock, threading through cracks and crevices. They broke down stone with acids secreted from their cells, turning barren cliffs into fertile ground. And as they died, their decaying bodies enriched the thin, lifeless soil, making way for others to follow. Then came the lichens, strange partnerships between fungi and algae, their symbiotic embrace allowing them to thrive where neither could survive alone. They painted the rocks in splashes of orange, grey, and green, their crusty forms weathering stone into sand, sand into earth. The land, once inert, began to breathe. The first true plants followed, tiny, creeping things with primitive roots and stems, their leaves barely more than scales. They were the ancestors of all future forests, though they stood no taller than a finger's width. But they had something their predecessors lacked: vascular tissue, thin tubes that could ferry water from the damp earth upward into their bodies. With this innovation, they could rise above the ground, reaching for the sun. The world began to shift. Where once there had been only rock, now there were carpets of green, soft underfoot, rustling in the wind. The air itself changed as these early plants exhaled oxygen, enriching the atmosphere, making it more hospitable for the creatures that would one day follow them onto land. And with the greening came the first animals, tiny arthropods, their bodies armored against desiccation, creeping between the stems to graze on the new abundance. They were the scouts of a coming invasion, the vanguard of a wave of life that would one day cover the continents in forests, plains, and deserts. The land was no longer a wasteland. It was a promise, a stage set for the next great act in Earth's story. The oceans, once ruled by spineless hunters and armored arthropods, now bore witness to a quiet revolution, one that would reshape the future of life itself. Deep in the ancient waters, where sunlight barely penetrated, a new kind of creature stirred. It was not the largest nor the fiercest, but it carried within it the seed of something extraordinary, a backbone. The first vertebrates were small, slender eel-like fish with flexible rods of cartilage running the length of their bodies. Unlike the segmented exoskeletons of their arthropod neighbors, these early fish relied on an internal scaffold, a structure that granted them both strength and agility. They darted through the water with sinuous grace, their tails propelling them forward, their primitive jaws snapping at smaller prey. Among them was Haikuichthys, no longer than a finger, its body a streamlined whisper in the currents. Its eyes, though simple, were keen enough to spot the flicker of movement in the murk. Along its flanks, faint ridges hinted at the beginnings of fins, tools for steering, for balance, for survival in an ever more competitive world. But the true marvel lay inside. A notochord, a precursor to the spine, anchored its muscles, allowing bursts of speed that left slower creatures vulnerable. Nerve fibers bundled along its back formed a rudimentary spinal cord, a highway for signals between brain and body. It was a blueprint for complexity, a design that would one day give rise to limbs, wings, and hands. Yet the oceans were not the only frontier. In the shallows, where water met land in a tangle of warm lagoons and tidal pools, some of these early fish began to venture where none of their kind had gone before. The mudflats, rich in decaying plants and stranded invertebrates, offered feasts for those bold enough to brave the shallows. Here, the water was thin, the oxygen scarce, and the pull of gravity inescapable. But life adapts. Some fish developed stronger, lobe-like fins, capable of pushing against the soft silt. Their gills, once suited only for water, began to absorb oxygen from the air as well. With each clumsy lunge onto land, they lingered a little longer, their bodies inching toward a new way of being. They were not yet amphibians, not yet true conquerors of the land, but they were close. Meanwhile, the seas teemed with their kin. Jawless fish like Arandaspis cruised the depths, their bodies encased in bony plates, their mouths circular and toothless, designed for sucking rather than biting. They were relics of an older time, soon to be overshadowed by their jawed descendants, creatures like Dunkleosteus, whose crushing plates of bone could rend flesh with terrifying efficiency. But it was the humble pioneers of the shallows, the ones who dared to nudge their snouts above the waterline, who held the greatest promise. Their experiments in breathing, in moving, in surviving at the edge of two worlds would one day lead to reptiles, to dinosaurs, to mammals. To us, the age of vertebrates had begun, and with it the march toward land, and all the wonders that lay beyond grew ever closer. The mudflats of the Devonian period were a battleground between two worlds, water and land. Here, in the sun-warmed shallows where algae clung to half-submerged rocks, and the air hummed with the buzz of early insects, the first vertebrates dragged themselves onto solid ground. Their fins, once used for graceful propulsion through water, had thickened into muscular lobes, capable of propping up their bodies in the muck. Their gills still labored in the thin, humid air, but their skin, newly adapted to absorb oxygen, kept them alive. These were the pioneers: Tiktaalik, Acanthostega, and Ichthyostega, creatures caught between two realms, their bodies a patchwork of aquatic and terrestrial adaptations. Tiktaalik was among the first to bridge the divide. With a flattened crocodile-like head and eyes perched on top of its skull, it could peer above the water's surface while its body remained submerged. Its fins bore sturdy bones, precursors to wrists and fingers, allowing it to push through dense vegetation or haul itself onto sun-baked logs. It was not yet a true landwalker, but it was no longer just a fish. Then came a Acanthostega, its limbs more defined, its digits, 8 on each forelimb, sprawling like the spokes of a primitive wheel. It moved awkwardly, its body still streamlined for swimming, its tail flicking in reflexive pulses even as it crawled through the shallows. It breathed through gills, but had the beginnings of lungs, sacs of tissue that gulped air when the water grew stagnant. And finally, Ichthyostega, bulkier, sturdier, its limbs strong enough to bear its weight for short bursts. It was the closest thing to a true amphibian, a creature that could venture further inland than any vertebrate before it. But it paid a price for its ambition. Without the buoyancy of water, its body sagged under its own weight. Every movement was a struggle, every breath a gamble. The land was not kind to these early explorers. Beyond the water's edge, the world was a labyrinth of towering ferns and moss-cloaked rocks, where millipedes as long as a man's arm scuttled through the undergrowth, and giant dragonflies with wingspans like birds patrolled the humid air. The first forests were taking root, their roots breaking stone into soil, their canopies knitting together to form a green twilight below. For the amphibians, this was both refuge and trap. The damp undergrowth offered shelter from the sun, but the air was dry compared to the water they had left behind. Their skin, though capable of breathing, had to stay moist or risk suffocation. They were prisoners of the wetlands, bound to the swamps and rivers that kept them alive. Yet they thrived. With no terrestrial predators to challenge them, they grew bold. Some, like the massive Mastodonsaurus, became apex hunters, their wide jaws snapping up fish and smaller amphibians with ease. Others, like the slender Eriops, stalked the water's edge, their powerful limbs allowing them to ambush prey, both in and out of the shallows. But their reign would not last forever. The climate was changing. The great swamps, once vast and interconnected, began to shrink as the land dried. The amphibians, so finely tuned to their watery world, found themselves cornered. Some retreated back to the rivers, their lineage continuing only in the shadows. Others perished, their bones sinking into the mud to become fossils, testaments to a time when life first dared to leave the sea. Yet their legacy endured. From their struggles came the first true reptiles, creatures with scaly skin that locked in moisture, with eggs encased in tough shells, freed from the need to return to water. The age of amphibians was ending, but their gamble had paved the way for the next conquerors of the land. And so, as the Carboniferous period waned, the stage was set for a new dynasty, one that would rise from the shadows of the ferns and claim the earth as its own. The age of reptiles was coming. The swamps of the late Carboniferous were a world in flux. Towering lycophyte trees, their trunks thick as pillars, stretched toward the sky, their canopies casting deep shadows over the labyrinth of ferns and moss below. The air was thick with the drone of insects, giant dragonflies with wings like stained glass, millipedes longer than a man's arm. But the rulers of this world were no longer the sluggish amphibians of old. Something new had emerged from the muck. The first reptiles were small, their bodies sleek and nimble compared to their amphibious cousins. They darted between the roots and over fallen logs, their movements quick and purposeful. What set them apart was not their size or strength, but a quiet revolution in their very biology. the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibians, whose jelly-coated spawn withered in the dry air, reptiles carried their young in shells, tough, leathery capsules that sealed in moisture and nutrients. Inside, the embryo floated in its own private sea, cushioned by membranes that kept it safe from the harsh world. Outside, no longer tethered to water for reproduction, these creatures could venture deeper into the forests, into the dry scrublands, even into the deserts. Among the earliest was Hylonomus, a lizard-like pioneer no larger than a human hand. Its slender body was clad in overlapping scales, a barrier against dehydration, and its legs splayed outward in a posture that allowed it to scurry with surprising speed. It hunted insects and smaller reptiles, its sharp teeth making quick work of prey. But its true triumph was unseen, the freedom its eggs granted it. While amphibians still congregated in dwindling pools, Hylonomus could lay its clutch in a burrow or beneath a rotting log, then leave, untroubled by the fate of its offspring. The land was no longer a prison. It was an empire. As the climate grew drier, the advantage shifted decisively in favor of the reptiles. Amphibians, their porous skin and water-bound reproduction a liability, retreated to the last remaining wetlands. But the reptiles thrived. Some, like the armored Scootosaurus, grew bulky and slow, their bodies encased in bony plates against predators. Others, like the agile Petrolochosaurus, took to the trees, their limbs adapted for climbing, their eyes sharp for spotting movement in the dappled light. And then came the hunters. Dimetrodon, though often mistaken for a dinosaur, was a synapsid, a distant relative of mammals, but its reign heralded the age of reptiles. With its towering sail of skin and bone, it basked in the sun, regulating its body temperature with an efficiency no amphibian could match. Its jaws, lined with serrated teeth, could shear through flesh with terrifying precision. It was the apex predator of its time, a glimpse of the dominance reptiles would soon claim. The world was changing around them. The great coal forests of the Carboniferous, built on the backs of towering ferns and club mosses, were giving way to new flora, conifers and seed ferns, plants that could reproduce without open water. The land grew drier, the seasons more pronounced. And through it all, the reptiles adapted. They grew larger, they grew smarter, they diversified into niches no amphibian could fill. Some took to the rivers, their bodies streamlined for swimming. Others burrowed, their limbs stout for digging. A few even took tentative steps toward the skies, their ribs elongating into primitive wings. But the greatest of their achievements was yet to come. For in their scales, their eggs, and their relentless adaptability, the reptiles carried the blueprint for the next great dynasty, one that would shake the earth with its footsteps and rule for millions of years. The age of dinosaurs was on the horizon, and it began here, in the humblest of origins, a small, scaly creature, darting through the undergrowth, its future written in the shells of its unborn young. The world had changed. Gone were the vast, humid swamps of the Carboniferous, their towering trees and labyrinthine waterways replaced by a harsher, drier landscape. The continents, once scattered, had begun their slow collision into the supercontinent known as Pangaea, a single sprawling landmass where deserts stretched for thousands of miles and inland seas shimmered under a relentless sun. This was the Permian period, a time of extremes and of strange, magnificent creatures. The land was no longer ruled by amphibians. Their reign had ended with the drying of the swamps, their reliance on water a fatal flaw in this new world. In their place rose the synapsids, beasts with sprawling gaits and powerful jaws, their lineage destined to one day give rise to mammals. But for now, They were the undisputed masters of the Permian. Among them lumbered Edaphosaurus, a hulking herbivore with a sail of skin and bone rising from its back. Like its carnivorous cousin Dimetrodon, the sail served as a thermal regulator, absorbing the sun's heat by day and radiating excess warmth by night. It moved in slow, deliberate strides, its blunt teeth grinding tough ferns and early conifers into pulp. But not all synapsids were gentle giants. Dimetrodon itself stalked the riverbanks, its serrated teeth capable of shearing through flesh with terrifying ease. Though often mistaken for a dinosaur, this predator was something far older, a relic of a time before true reptiles split into their modern branches. Its sail, taller and more pronounced than Edaphosaurus's, cast a jagged shadow across the sand as it pursued smaller synapsids and reptiles. Yet the synapsids were not alone in their dominance. Strange reptilian creatures shared their world. Parareptiles like Scootosaurus, a barrel-bodied herbivore armored in thick, bony plates. It moved in herds, a living fortress against predators, its beaked mouth stripping vegetation with methodical efficiency. Alongside it slithered Eudybamus, a small, fleet-footed reptile with legs longer than any of its kin, a sprinter in an age of plodding giants. But the most bizarre inhabitants of the Permian were the therapsids, advanced synapsids whose anatomy hinted at the mammals to come. Lystrosaurus, a squat, tusked creature with a face like a shovel, rooted through the scrub for tough roots and tubers. Its barrel chest and short tail gave it an almost pig-like appearance, but its physiology was revolutionary. Limbs positioned more beneath its body for efficient movement, teeth differentiated into incisors and molars, a precursor to the specialized dentition of mammals. And then there were the Gorgonopsids. In Austransevia, the apex predator of its time, was a nightmare made flesh. The size of a lion, its elongated skull housed saber-like canines, perfect for puncturing the thick hides of its prey. Its legs were positioned directly beneath its body, granting it a speed and agility unmatched by its sprawling competitors. When it ran like a wolf, not like the sluggish reptiles of older eras. The world these creatures inhabited was unforgiving. Pangaea's interior was a desert, its dunes shifting under scorching winds. Water was scarce, and survival meant adaptation, burrowing into the earth to escape the heat, migrating with the rains, or evolving ways to conserve every precious drop. Yet life flourished. The first true conifers rose in scattered woodlands, their needle-like leaves resistant to drought. Insects diversified, their armored bodies proof against the drying air. And in the shadows of the synapsids and reptiles, smaller creatures, early ancestors of lizards and turtles, carved out their own niches. But the Permian was not destined to last. Beneath the surface of this thriving world, forces were gathering, forces that would soon unleash catastrophe on a scale never before seen. The land of synapsids and strange reptiles stood on the brink of devastation. The great dying was coming. Pangaea sprawled beneath a merciless sun, its vast deserts shimmering with heat haze, its inland seas shrinking under the weight of endless drought. The Permian world was lush in places, scattered conifer forests, river valleys thick with ferns, but beneath the surface, the planet was restless. Deep beneath the supercontinent, magma seethed in chambers older than the mountains themselves. The Earth's crust, strained by the collision of continents, groaned under the pressure. And then it cracked. The eruptions began in what would one day be Siberia. Not the fiery belches of ordinary volcanoes, but something far more catastrophic. Flood basalts. Fissures miles long split the land like overripe fruit, vomiting forth rivers of molten rock so vast they could have drowned entire countries. The lava spread in waves, swallowing forests, plains, and river systems in an unstoppable tide. The sky filled with ash, a black shroud that dimmed the sun for decades. But the lava was only the beginning. The eruptions unleashed something far deadlier, gases trapped in the Earth's belly. Carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide. They poured into the atmosphere in quantities unimaginable. The planet's delicate balance tilted. Greenhouse gases spiked, and the world began to cook. The oceans suffered first. Waters warmed, their oxygen dissolving away like breath in a furnace. Marine life, adapted to cooler, richer seas, suffocated en masse. Coral reefs, Permian cities of color and motion, bleached and crumbled into ghostly ruins. Trilobites, survivors of countless extinctions, finally met their end, their armored forms sinking into the anoxic deep. On land, the synapsids and reptiles fared little better. Lystrosaurus, that hardy, tusked grazer, watched as its world withered. The rivers it drank from dwindled to toxic trickles, laced with acid rain. The ferns and cycads it relied on yellowed and died, their roots poisoned by sulfur leaching into the soil. Herds thinned, then vanished, their bones left to bleach in the sun. The predators followed. In Ostransphere, the saber-toothed terror found its prey gone. It stalked the cracked mud flats of vanished lakes, ribs stark beneath its thinning hide, until even its great strength failed. The Gorgonopsids, once kings of their age, became ghosts in a dying world. And still the eruptions raged. Temperatures soared. The poles, once cool refuges, became ovens. Glaciers melted, and the seas, swollen and starved of oxygen, belched hydrogen sulfide, a poison that turned the waters the color of spoiled blood. The gas seeped into the air, a lethal miasma that scoured lungs and choked the last of the land's survivors. The Permian extinction was not a single event, but a cascade of disasters: fire, poison, starvation, suffocation. By the time the eruptions ceased, 90% of all life on Earth had perished. The supercontinent, once teeming, was a graveyard. Yet life clung on. In the shadow of annihilation, a few hardy survivors endured. Lystrosaurus, smaller now, its herds reduced to scattered bands, gnawed at the roots of stubborn desert shrubs. Burrowing reptiles, shielded from the worst of the gases, emerged to find a world emptied of competitors. And in the toxic seas, a handful of mollusks and fish eked out an existence in the shallows where oxygen still lingered. The Permian had ended in fire, but from the ashes, slowly, impossibly, life would begin again. The age of synapsids was over. The age of reptiles was about to begin in earnest. And beneath their feet, unnoticed, the first whispers of a new lineage, small, warm-blooded and resilient, were stirring in the darkness. The Triassic awaited. The silence was the worst of it. Where once the rivers had thrummed with the splash of fleeing amphibians and the rasp of grazing Lystrosaurus, now there was only wind. Hot, dry, and lifeless. The forests stood as skeletal sentinels, their trunks blackened by acid rain, their canopies reduced to brittle twigs that snapped underfoot like ancient bones. The oceans, once teeming with trilobites and coiled ammonites, had become stagnant graveyards, their surfaces streaked with the iridescent sheen of bacterial mats feasting on the dead. This was Earth after the Permian Triassic extinction, a world gutted. The catastrophe had unfolded in waves, each more brutal than the last. The Siberian traps, those unimaginable floods of lava, had been only the spark. The true devastation came in the aftermath. Carbon dioxide levels skyrocketed, turning the atmosphere into a suffocating blanket. Global temperatures spiked, and the oceans, overheated and oxygen-starved, became death traps. Hydrogen sulfide bubbled up from the depths, poisoning the waters and seeping into the air. The very chemistry of the planet had been rewritten. On land, the herbivores died first. Lystrosaurus, once so abundant its fossils would one day litter entire hillsides, stumbled through landscapes of withered ferns, its tusks useless against the starvation that gripped it. Its kind had survived so much: drought, competition, predation. But this was different. The plants it ate were either gone or laced with toxins, their leaves curled and blackened by acid rain. One by one, the herds collapsed, their bodies piling in dried riverbeds where no scavengers came to claim them. The predators followed. Inostransavia, the saber-toothed nightmare of the Permian, paced the edges of its shrinking territory, its ribs pressing against its scaly hide. There was no prey left to hunt, no Scutosaurus lumbering through the scrub, no smaller synapsids darting between rocks. The Gorgonopsids, those magnificent killing machines, starved in the open, their saber teeth gleaming uselessly in the sun as they took their last breaths. The seas fared no better. Reefs that had thrived for millions of years dissolved in the acidic waters, their coral architects reduced to bleached skeletons. Ammonites, their spiral shells once drifting in colorful legions, floated lifelessly before sinking into the murk. The trilobites, Earth's ancient survivors, veterans of every extinction before this one, finally met their end, their segmented bodies crumbling into the sediment. And then, the silence. No calls of amphibians in the marshes, no rustle of synapsids in the undergrowth, no ripple of fish breaking the surface of poisoned lakes. Just the wind, scouring the land, and the occasional hiss of gas escaping from cracks in the earth. Yet life, stubborn and relentless, clung on. In the darkest corners of the world, burrows where the air was marginally cleaner, deep-sea vents where oxygen still seeped from the crust, a handful of survivors endured. Lystrosaurus, smaller and hardier now, dug for roots in cracked riverbeds. A few species of mollusks, their metabolism slowed to a crawl, persisted in the shallows. And in the shadows, unnoticed, tiny creatures with fur-like coverings and faster heartbeats scurried through the night. They were the inheritors. The great dying had reset the world, wiping the slate clean with fire and poison. But from the ashes, life would stir again. Tentative at first, then bold, then unstoppable. The age of reptiles was dawning, and with it, the rise of creatures that would one day dwarf the giants of the Permian. But for now, there was only silence, and the slow, patient whisper of rebirth. The Triassic dawned in desolation. The earth, still reeling from the great dying, was a world of dust and dry riverbeds, where the bones of Permian giants lay half-buried in cracked mud. The air, though clearing of poison, remained thick with the memory of catastrophe. Yet life, as it always does, found a way. In the shadow of extinction, new forms emerged, small, quick, and resilient. Among them, a lineage of reptiles with a peculiar trait: legs positioned directly beneath their bodies rather than splayed to the sides like the sprawling synapsids of old. This simple change granted them efficiency, speed, and a steadiness of gait that their ancestors could never match. They were the first dinosaurs, but they were not yet kings. The earliest dinosaurs were unassuming creatures, no larger than a turkey, their bodies lean and built for agility. Eoraptor, one of the first known, darted through the fern-choked undergrowth of what would one day become South America. Its sharp teeth, varied in shape, hinted at an omnivorous diet. Scavenged meat, insects, perhaps even the tender shoots of new-growth plants. It moved on two legs, its long tail balancing its body as it ran, its hands equipped with grasping fingers. It was a generalist in a world of specialists, and that would prove its salvation. Beside it, Herrerasaurus stalked the riverbanks, a slightly larger predator, its serrated teeth and hooked claws marking it as a hunter. But even this fearsome creature was dwarfed by the true rulers of the early Triassic, the crocodile-like Rauisuchians and the armored, lumbering Etosaurs. The Rauisuchians were the apex predators of their time, their massive skulls bristling with teeth as long as a man's finger. Postosuchus, a nightmarish blend of crocodile and theropod, prowled the floodplains, its muscular limbs capable of sudden, terrifying bursts of speed. It was to these beasts that the first dinosaurs were little more than opportunistic scavengers, darting in to steal scraps before vanishing into the undergrowth. The Etosaurs, meanwhile, were the tanks of the Triassic, low-slung, heavily armored herbivores like Desmatosuchus, its back studded with bony plates and its shoulders sporting menacing spikes. It grubbed through the dirt for roots and tubers, its beak-like mouth shearing through vegetation with ease. To a small dinosaur, it was an unassailable fortress. Yet the dinosaurs had something their competitors lacked: potential. Their upright posture allowed for more efficient breathing, their lungs expanding with each stride. Their light, hollow bones made them agile, their metabolisms hinting at a capacity for sustained activity that the sluggish Rauisuchians could never match, and their diversity, some carnivorous, some omnivorous, some perhaps even herbivorous, meant they could exploit niches others overlooked. But the Triassic was a harsh testing ground. The climate, still volatile, swung between monsoonal deluges and searing droughts. The continents, locked in Pangaea's grip, offered little refuge from the extremes. Volcanoes rumbled, their eruptions a constant reminder of the planet's unrest. In this crucible, the dinosaurs were not yet dominant. They were survivors, clinging to the edges of a world still ruled by older, more entrenched lineages. But change was coming. The Triassic would not last forever. And when the next great extinction came, it would not be the Rauisuchians or the Etosaurs that emerged victorious. It would be the small, the swift, the adaptable. It would be the dinosaurs. The world was shifting. The Rauisuchians, once the undisputed lords of the Triassic, now faced a changing landscape, one where their brute strength and ambush tactics were no longer enough. The climate grew more unpredictable, the forests thinner, the competition fiercer. And through it all, the dinosaurs persisted. Small at first, they were easy to overlook. Eoraptor scavenged in the shadows, Herrerasaurus picked off weaker prey, and other early dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus, one of the first herbivores, nibbled at ferns and shoots. But their adaptations were quietly revolutionary. Their legs, positioned directly beneath their bodies, allowed them to move with a stamina their sprawling competitors couldn't match. A Rauisuchian like Postosuchus might explode into a sprint, but it tired quickly, its sideways limbs inefficient over long distances. A dinosaur, though, could keep going, its gait smooth, its breath steady. And then came the rains. The late Triassic was a time of monsoons, of flash floods that turned dry riverbeds into torrents overnight. The Rauisuchians, heavy and slow, struggled in the mud, their massive bodies sinking where lighter dinosaurs darted across. The Etosaurs, armored though they were, found their low-slung bellies mired in the muck. But the dinosaurs? They climbed. They ran. They adapted. One species in particular began to rise above the rest, Celophysis. Slender as a whip and just as fast, Celophysis hunted in packs, its hollow bones making it a ghost on the wind. It wasn't the largest predator, nor the strongest, but it was relentless. Where Postosuchus faltered in the dry seasons, Caulophaisis thrived, its metabolism allowing it to endure where others starved. And when the monsoons came, it simply moved higher, scaling rocky outcrops where the sluggish reptiles couldn't follow. Meanwhile, the first true herbivorous dinosaurs were making their mark. Creatures like Plateosaurus, larger and more robust than their ancestors, browsed on the tough new conifers that were spreading across Pangaea. Their necks stretched higher than any etosaurs, their teeth shaped for grinding rather than tearing. They moved in herds, their numbers a defense against the dwindling predators. The balance was tipping. Then came the final blow, not from competition but from the skies. Another extinction event struck at the end of the Triassic. Massive volcanic eruptions, much like those that had ended the Permian, spewed lava and poison gas across the continents. The Rauisuchians, already struggling, perished in the upheaval. The etosaurs, too specialized, too slow, vanished with them. But the dinosaurs? They endured. Their small size, their adaptability, their efficient bodies, they were the perfect survivors. While the old world burned, they clung to the edges, waiting. And when the smoke cleared, the land was empty. Empty, except for them. The age of dinosaurs had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The world was breaking apart. Pangaea, the vast supercontinent that had dominated the planet for millions of years, groaned under the strain of forces deep within the earth. Molten rock surged upward, splitting the land like a fractured eggshell. Rifts widened into valleys, valleys into inland seas, and by the dawn of the Jurassic, the once unified landmass had begun its slow, inexorable divorce. This was the Jurassic dawn, a time of upheaval, of opportunity, and of dinosaurs unleashed. With the fracturing of Pangaea came new climates, new ecosystems, and new frontiers. The inland seas that formed between the separating continents brought moisture to once arid regions, nurturing vast conifer forests and fern-filled floodplains. The air, thick with oxygen from the spreading greenery, hummed with the drone of giant dragonflies and the rustle of early mammals scurrying in the undergrowth. And the dinosaurs? They flourished. Freed from the constraints of the Triassic's harsh extremes, they diversified with breathtaking speed. The slender, fleet-footed theropods of old grew larger, their forms adapting to fill the voids left by the vanished Rauisuchians. Dilophosaurus, a predator as long as a bus, prowled the riverbanks of early North America, its twin crests flaring like crimson banners above its yellow eyes. It was no scavenger. This was a hunter, its sharp claws and powerful legs built for pursuit. Yet not all dinosaurs were carnivores. The sauropodomorphs, descendants of creatures like Plateosaurus, had begun their transformation into the giants of legend. Volcanodon, one of the earliest true sauropods, was a harbinger of things to come, a long-necked, pillar-legged herbivore that browsed the treetops, its teeth raking through conifer needles with methodical precision. It was small compared to the behemoths that would follow, but its body bore the blueprint of titans, vertebrae laced with air sacs for lightness, limbs locked into columnar perfection for bearing weight. Meanwhile, the first armored dinosaurs appeared. Coelodosaurus, a low-slung herbivore clad in bony plates and spikes, lumbered through the Jurassic undergrowth, its body a fortress against predators. It was an early experiment in defense, a precursor to the tank-like ankylosaurs of later ages. But the true marvels of the Jurassic were not just the dinosaurs themselves. It was the world they now inhabited. The splitting of Pangaea had created coastlines where none had existed before, and with them came new habitats. Mangrove-like forests fringed the shores, their roots tangling in the tidal mud, while vast shallow seas teemed with marine reptiles and coiled ammonites. Pterosaurs, their wingspans now stretching wider than any Triassic ancestor, rode the thermals above the waves, their sharp eyes scanning for fish. And beneath it all, the earth hummed with change. The dinosaurs, once survivors on the fringes, now stood at the heart of a world reshaped. They had weathered extinction, outlasted their rivals, and seized the opportunities of a fragmenting supercontinent. The Jurassic was theirs to rule, but the greatest of their kind, the true giants, were yet to come. The dawn had broken. The age of monsters was just beginning. The first true giants emerged in the mist-shrouded floodplains of the early Jurassic, their footsteps sending tremors through the earth. These were the sauropods, long-necked behemoths whose very existence defied the limits of biology. Brachiosaurus was among the pioneers. Towering over the canopy, its forelegs longer than its hind limbs, it moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a living mountain. Its neck stretched skyward, allowing it to strip conifer branches 30 feet above the ground, a height no other herbivore could reach. Each breath it took filled lungs the size of barrels, oxygenating blood that traveled through arteries thick as a man's arm to reach its distant extremities. But size came at a cost. Every step required precision. A misplaced foot could shatter bones under the creature's own weight. Its heart, a monstrous pump, labored to keep circulation flowing through its gargantuan frame. And yet it thrived, its body a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Air sacs threaded through its vertebrae, lightening its skeleton without sacrificing strength. Its teeth, peg-like and raking, were built for stripping foliage, not chewing. It swallowed stones to grind its meals in a muscular gizzard, freeing its head from the burden of heavy jaws. Where the sauropods walked, the land reshaped itself. Forests thinned under their endless appetite, creating sun-dappled clearings where ferns and cycads sprouted anew. Their dung, dropped in steaming mounds, fertilized the soil and spread seeds across the continent. They were ecosystem engineers, their movements dictating the lives of countless smaller creatures. But the giants were not unopposed. The first great predators of the Jurassic had risen to meet them. Allosaurus, though not yet the apex hunter it would become, was already a nightmare given flesh. 15 feet of sinew and serrated teeth, it prowled the edges of sauropod herds, its eyes locked on the young, the sick, the stragglers. It hunted in packs, its strategy one of attrition, landing, slashing blows with its claws, weakening its prey over days until exhaustion did what brute force could not. Smaller theropods, like the cunning Ornitholestes, darted between the legs of the sauropods, snapping at insects and lizards stirred up by their passage. The world had become a tapestry of interdependencies, each thread, predator, prey, scavenger, woven tightly into the whole. And then there were the guardians. Stegosaurus, its back lined with plates like the fins of some primordial furnace, moved among the sauropods, a walking fortress. Its spiked tail, a weapon capable of puncturing bone, swung lazily at its sides, a warning to any predator bold enough to approach. The sauropods tolerated its presence. The stegosaur's low browsing habits didn't compete with their canopy stripping, and its vigilance added another layer of defense. The Jurassic was finding its balance. But balance, in nature, is a fleeting thing. In the shadows of these titans, smaller creatures carved out their existences. Early mammals, no larger than rats, scurried through the undergrowth, their fur-covered bodies warm with the heat of constant motion. They were insignificant now, mere morsels for the dinosaurs, but their lineage carried a spark that would one day outlast the giants. And high above, pterosaurs rode the thermals, their shadows flickering over the land below. The world was vast, interconnected, alive in ways the Triassic could never have imagined. The Jurassic dawn had reached its zenith. The age of dinosaurs was in full swing, and the greatest chapters of their reign were yet to come. The skies of the Jurassic had never known such rulers. Long before birds claimed the heavens, the first vertebrates to conquer the air were already soaring over vast flood plains and shimmering inland seas. Their wings, vast membranes of skin stretched taut over elongated fourth fingers, cast rippling shadows over the ferns and conifers below. These were the pterosaurs, and their reign was absolute. Rhamphorhynchus was among the earliest, a creature of the late Triassic that had survived into the Jurassic dawn. With a wingspan no wider than a gull's, it darted over river deltas, its long, needle-toothed jaws snapping at fish near the surface. Its tail, stiffened by rod-like tendons, ended in a diamond-shaped vein that acted as a rudder, allowing it to pivot mid-air with uncanny precision. When it shrieked, the sound was like a blade drawn across stone, a challenge, a warning, a claim to its hunting grounds. But the Jurassic demanded more than just small, agile hunters. As the sauropods grew, so too did their winged shadows. Dimorphodon, with its massive crested skull and wingspan stretching 10 feet, perched on coastal cliffs like a gargoyle come to life. Its teeth, long in the front, shorter in the back, were built for gripping, slippery prey, and its powerful hind legs allowed it to launch itself into the air with a single, explosive leap. It was no graceful flyer. Its flight was a series of powerful flaps and glides, more suited to short bursts over water than long-distance soaring. Yet the true masters of the air were yet to come. Pterodactylus, the names of its lineage, heralded a new era. Sleeker than its predecessors, it lacked the long tail of Rhamphorhynchus, trading stability for agility. Its slender jaws, lined with fine teeth, plucked fish from the waves with effortless precision. But its greatest innovation was its flight style. Long, languid glides punctuated by occasional flaps, a technique that conserved energy and allowed it to range farther than any pterosaur before it. The pterosaurs were not merely flying reptiles, they were architects of the air. Their hollow bones, lighter than those of any dinosaur, were reinforced with internal struts for strength. Their brains, large and complex, processed the rapid calculations needed for mid-air maneuvers. Some species, like the crested Ctenochasma, even bore fine bristles around their jaws, early precursors to the filtering systems of modern birds, allowing them to sieve tiny prey from the water. And then there were the giants. Though the true titans of the pterosaur world would not emerge until the Cretaceous, the Jurassic laid the groundwork. Dearc, a recent discovery from Scotland's Isle of Skye, boasted a wingspan rivaling that of an albatross, a glimpse of the colossal dimensions some lineages would one day achieve. But the skies were not without peril. Pterosaurs faced predators from above and below. Marine reptiles like Ichthyosaurus lurked beneath the waves, snatching unwary flyers that skimmed too close to the surface. On land, theropods like Allosaurus might leap to drag a low-gliding pterosaur from the air, their serrated teeth making quick work of fragile wings. Even other pterosaurs were a threat. Larger species bullied smaller ones off carcasses or outright hunted them. Yet the pterosaurs endured, their dominion unchallenged. They were the first to truly claim the skies, their wings writing a new chapter in the story of life, one that would one day be inherited by birds, then bats, then, finally, the dreaming apes who would look up and wonder how it all began. For now, though, the Jurassic heavens belonged to them, and their shadows stretched long over the age of dinosaurs. The fossil was unlike anything the paleontologists had ever seen. Embedded in the fine-grained limestone of Liaoning, China, the imprint was not just bone. It was shadow, texture, the ghost of something far more delicate. Along the creature's arms and tail, faint but unmistakable, were the traces of feathers. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific world. For centuries, dinosaurs had been depicted as scaled reptilian monsters, leathery hides stretched over hulking frames. But here, in this slab of stone, was proof that some had been clad in plumage, their bodies adorned with structures once thought exclusive to birds. Sinosauropteryx, the first of these feathered dinosaurs to be identified, was a small theropod no larger than a turkey. Its fossilized remains revealed a coat of fuzzy proto-feathers, simple filaments that hugged its body like the down of a chick. But it wasn't alone. Microraptor, a crow-sized predator, bore wings on both its arms and legs, a four-winged glider that flitted between Jurassic trees like a living kite. Its feathers, asymmetrical like those of modern birds, hinted at an ability to control its descent, if not truly fly. And then there was Yutyrannus, a relative of Tyrannosaurus but cloaked in shaggy plumage. This was no delicate flyer. It was a 9-meter-long apex predator, its feathers likely serving as insulation in the cool Cretaceous forests it prowled. The implications were staggering. Feathers, it seemed, had not evolved for flight at all. They began as simple filaments, perhaps for warmth or display or even camouflage. Only later, in certain lineages, had they been co-opted for aerial acrobatics. The boundary between dinosaur and bird blurred. Archaeopteryx, long hailed as the first true bird, now appeared as just one branch on a vast feathered family tree. Its teeth, bony tail, and clawed wings marked it unmistakably as a dinosaur, yet its flight feathers were indistinguishable from those of a modern sparrow. The fossils kept coming. Anchiornis, a tiny Jurassic theropod, left behind not just feathers but melanosomes, pigment-bearing structures that revealed its striking coloration, a slate-grey body, white wing stripes, and a russet crown like a woodpecker's crest. Science had to rewrite the books. No longer could dinosaurs be painted as dull, lumbering reptiles. They were vibrant, dynamic, some sleek with pennaceous feathers, others shaggy like emus, still others adorned with extravagant plumes for courtship displays. The Mesozoic world, once imagined in greens and browns, now shimmered with iridescence and riotous color. But the greatest revelation was yet to come. As more fossils emerged, a pattern became clear. Feathers were not some rare oddity. They were ancestral. The common ancestor of all theropods, the group that included Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and modern birds, likely bore some form of plumage. The implications were profound. Perhaps even the mighty T-Rex had been feathered, at least in part. Juvenile tyrannosaurs, small and vulnerable, might have sported downy coats for insulation, shedding them as they grew into their colossal adult sizes. The world of dinosaurs would never look the same again. The fossils of Liaoning had not just added detail to ancient creatures, they had rewritten their very essence. The line between dinosaur and bird, once so sharp, now faded into a spectrum of scales, fuzz, and flight-ready veins. And somewhere in that spectrum, the story of feathers became the story of wings, of how earthbound reptiles first reached for the skies, and in doing so, gave rise to the birds that still sing outside our windows today. The mystery of the feathered dinosaurs was no longer about what separated them from birds. It was about what made them family. The world was in full bloom. Where Jurassic forests had been dominated by conifers and ferns, the Cretaceous now erupted in a riot of color, petals unfurling in shades of white, yellow, and violet, their nectar sweetening the air. These were the angiosperms, the flowering plants, and their rise would forever alter the face of the planet. For the dinosaurs it was a golden age. The sauropods, those long-necked titans of the Jurassic, still ruled the floodplains, but now they shared their world with a dazzling array of newcomers. Triceratops, its three-horned face a shield against predators, moved in herds through fields of early magnolias and sycamores, their beaks snipping through tough stems with ease. Duck-billed hadrosaurs, their crests hollow and resonant, filled the valleys with low, booming calls as they foraged on the flowering undergrowth. And then there were the predators. Tyrannosaurus rex, the tyrant king itself, stalked the edges of these herds, its bone-crushing bite force unmatched by any land animal before or since. But it was not alone. Dakota raptor, a sleek, feathered hunter half its size, darted through the underbrush in packs, its sickle claws flashing as it harried younger or weaker prey. The Cretaceous was a world of specialists, each dinosaur honed to perfection for its niche. But the true marvels were not just the dinosaurs themselves, it was the ecosystems they inhabited. The flowering plants had triggered an explosion of diversity. Bees, their bodies dusted with pollen, buzzed from blossom to blossom in a dance older than time. Butterflies, their wings painted in patterns no dinosaur could appreciate, flitted through the air. Even the soil teemed with new life, earthworms churning the earth, their burrows aerating the roots of this burgeoning green world. And high above, the pterosaurs had reached their zenith. Quetzalcoatlus, with a wingspan rivaling a small airplane, soared on thermal currents, its sharp eyes scanning for carcasses or live prey small enough to snatch. The skies had never known such giants, and the land below had never been so lush. Yet for all its vibrancy, the Cretaceous was a world in flux. The continents, once locked together in Pangaea, had drifted further apart, their separation creating new oceans and weather patterns. The climate was warmer, the seas higher, and the air thick with moisture. Storms raged with a fury unseen in earlier ages, their winds whipping the petals from the flowering trees and churning the oceans into froth. But the dinosaurs adapted. Some, like the armored Ankylosaurus, grew even more heavily fortified, their clubbed tails capable of shattering bone. Others, like the ostrich-like Ornithomimus, relied on speed and cunning, their feathered bodies built for sprinting through the undergrowth. And beneath their feet, unnoticed, the world's first grasses began to spread, a humble innovation that would one day transform the planet all over again. The Cretaceous was a time of abundance, of experimentation, of life in all its wild and untamed glory. But even golden ages must end, and the end, when it came, would be written in fire. The reign of Tyrannosaurus was absolute. Across the floodplains of late Cretaceous North America, the tyrant lizard's thunderous footsteps sent tremors through the earth. Its massive skull, nearly 5 feet long, housed teeth like railroad spikes, serrated, bone-crushing, and perpetually stained with the remnants of its last kill. Unlike the agile, feathered raptors of its time, T-Rex was brute force incarnate, a predator built to dominate. But even kings had rivals. Triceratops, the three-horned titan, was no easy prey. Bulls weighed up to 12 tons, their frills a shield against the crushing jaws of their nemesis. When a T-Rex approached, the herd would form a defensive circle, juveniles sheltered within as adults lowered their heads, presenting a wall of dagger-like horns. Battles between these behemoths were clashes of pure power, T-Rex lunging for the neck, Triceratops countering with a swipe of its brow horns that could disembowel. The mud bore witness to their struggles, churned with footprints and the occasional shattered tooth. Yet not all herbivores relied on confrontation. The hadrosaurs, with their duck-billed mouths and intricate crests, chose flight over fight. Parasaurolophus, its long, backward-curving crest acting as a resonating chamber, could bellow warnings across miles. At the first sign of danger, herds stampeded in orchestrated chaos, their three-toed tracks weaving through the ferns like a frantic tapestry. Meanwhile, the armored dinosaurs had perfected defense. Ankylosaurus was a fortress on 4 legs. Its back was plated with osteoderms, bony scutes fused into its skin, while its tail ended in a massive club of solid bone. When threatened, it would tuck its limbs beneath its body, presenting an unbreakable shell. A careless T-Rex, lured by the promise of an easy meal, might find its shins shattered by a single swing of that bludgeon. The Cretaceous was an arms race, each adaptation met with a countermove. Predators grew smarter. Fossilized trackways revealed packs of Dakota raptor hunting in coordinated strikes, their sickle claws hooking into the flanks of hadrosaurs too slow to flee. Some theropods, like the ostrich-like Ornithomimus, abandoned meat altogether, their beaks plucking fruit and seeds from the newly evolved flowering plants. Herbivores grew more cunning. Pachycephalosaurus used its domed skull not just for ramming rivals, but for deflecting predator bites. Juvenile ceratopsians, their horns still small, mimicked the adults' defensive postures to bluff approaching carnivores. And beneath it all, the world kept changing. The first true grasses spread across the continents, their roots stabilizing soil that had once blown unchecked in the wind. Bees droned from flower to flower, their pollination fueling an explosion of plant diversity. Even the oceans teemed with giants, mosasaurs, serpentine leviathans that hunted in the shallows, and Archelon, a sea turtle the size of a car. But the clock was ticking. In the shadows of the dinosaurs' golden age, mammals scurried through the undergrowth, their warm blood and burrowing habits making them survivors of every catastrophe. Pterosaurs, though magnificent, were slowly yielding the skies to birds, small feathered descendants of theropods who sang from the branches of flowering trees. And far away, beyond the horizon, an asteroid hurtled through the void. For now, though, the Cretaceous flourished, a world of thunderous footsteps, bellowing herds, and the endless dance of predator and prey. The age of dinosaurs had reached its zenith, but zeniths by nature cannot last. The oceans of the Mesozoic were a realm of monsters. While dinosaurs ruled the land, the seas teemed with creatures just as formidable, reptiles that had returned to the water, their bodies reshaped by evolution into sleek, predatory perfection. These were the ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs, the mosasaurs, the true leviathans of the deep. Among them, the ichthyosaurs were the oldest dynasty. Ichthyosaurus, their namesake, was a marvel of convergent evolution, a reptile that looked, moved, and hunted like a dolphin. Its streamlined body cut through the waves with effortless grace, its tail fluke propelling it forward in bursts of speed. Its eyes, the largest of any known vertebrate relative to its size, were adapted to the dim light of deeper waters, allowing it to spot squid and fish in the gloom. Unlike their land-bound ancestors, ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young in the water, their offspring emerging tail first to avoid drowning, a trait that bound them irrevocably to the sea. But even these swift hunters were not without rivals. The plesiosaurs were the enigmas of the Mesozoic seas. Elasmosaurus, with its absurdly long neck and paddle-like limbs, moved with an undulating grace that defied logic. Its neck, stretching over 20 feet, was a weapon of precision, allowing it to dart its head into schools of fish while its massive body remained unseen below. Some paleontologists speculated it could even strike like a snake, its sharp teeth snapping shut with lethal accuracy. Others, like Leopleurodon, were short-necked and built for power. Their jaws, lined with conical teeth, could crush through the shells of ammonites or the ribs of smaller marine reptiles. They were the apex predators of their time, their bulk and strength unrivaled. until the mosasaurs arrived. The mosasaurs were latecomers to the Mesozoic seas, but they dominated with ruthless efficiency. Mosasaurus, the largest of them, was a nightmare given form. Its body, serpentine and muscular, could stretch over 50 feet, its jaws unhinging to swallow prey whole. Its teeth, curved backward like fishhooks, ensured that anything caught in its bite had no chance of escape. Fossilized stomach contents revealed a diet of fish, seabirds, ammonites, and even other mosasaurs. The oceans were a battleground. Ichthyosaurs, with their speed and agility, hunted in the open water, their bodies glinting like silver knives in the sunlit shallows. Plesiosaurs patrolled the reefs and kelp forests, their long necks weaving through the foliage in search of hidden prey. Mosasaurs, the undisputed tyrants of the late Cretaceous, lurked in the depths, rising in explosive bursts to drag unsuspecting victims below. Yet the seas were not theirs alone. Giant ammonites, their spiral shells as wide as wagon wheels, drifted through the currents, their tentacles snaring smaller prey. Sea turtles like Archelon, larger than any alive today, paddled through the warm waters, their jaws crushing shellfish with ease. And beneath them all, the sharks, ancient lineages that had survived since the Devonian, slipped through the shadows, their forms barely changed over eons. The balance was delicate. When a mosasaur died, its carcass sank to the abyss, where scavengers like Xiphactinus, a monstrous fish with teeth like needles, picked its bones clean. When an ichthyosaur gave birth, opportunistic pterosaurs would swoop down to snatch the newborns before they could reach the safety of deeper water. And then, as with all things in the Mesozoic, the end came. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs spelled doom for the sea's great reptiles as well. The mosasaurs, the plesiosaurs, the ichthyosaurs, all vanished in the cataclysm, their reign extinguished in a geologic instant. Only the sharks, the turtles, the coiled ammonites' distant squid relatives would endure. The seas of the Mesozoic had been a world of tooth and scale, of speed and ambush, of monsters that dwarfed the imagination. And then, like a wave receding, they were gone. Beneath the thunderous footsteps of dinosaurs, the world hummed with quieter lives. While Tyrannosaurus ruled the floodplains and Triceratops clashed in titanic duels, another lineage endured, small, warm-blooded, and endlessly adaptable. These were the mammals, no larger than rats, their furred bodies darting through the undergrowth like shadows given form. The night belonged to them. Under the cloak of darkness, Repenomamus, a rare exception to the rule of small size, snuffled through the leaf litter, its sharp teeth capable of cracking through the bones of juvenile dinosaurs. Most mammals, though, were far more modest. Jurassic, one of the earliest placental mammals, clung to tree bark with needle-like claws, its insectivorous diet keeping it safely beneath the notice of larger predators. They were survivors in a world of giants. The key to their success lay in their biology. Fur insulated them against the cool Cretaceous nights. Milk nourished their young without the need for vulnerable nests. And their teeth, specialized into molars, incisors, canines, allowed them to exploit niches the reptiles couldn't, gnawing seeds, crushing beetles, lapping up the nectar of newly evolved flowers. But their greatest advantage was their brains. Though small, early mammals like Morganucodon had larger brain-to-body ratios than most reptiles. They learned quickly, remembered hiding places, and navigated complex burrows. Some even ventured into the trees, their limbs evolving into gliding membranes, experiments in aerial escape. Yet caution was their constant companion. A single misstep could mean death. The hoot of an owl-like Archaeopteryx sent them scrambling for cover. The rustle of a feathered dromaeosaur in the ferns froze them in place, hearts pounding. They were the hunted, not the hunters, but their time would come. For now they waited. While dinosaurs shook the earth, mammals thrived in the margins, under logs, in hollow trees, deep in warrens where no claw could reach. Their world was one of whispers and twitching whiskers, of survival measured in heartbeats and moonlit breaths, unnoticed, unassuming, biding their time. The skull of Troodon was a labyrinth of clues. Held up to the light, its fossilized brain case revealed an imprint of folds and ridges, an ancient map of a mind long extinct. Compared to other dinosaurs of its size, the space reserved for its brain was unusually large, its proportions hinting at a capacity for problem-solving, memory, and perhaps even social complexity. This was the puzzle of dinosaur intelligence. How creatures so alien to us could have been so much more than the lumbering brutes of popular imagination. Fossilized trackways told part of the story. In a remote stretch of Cretaceous-era rock in Texas, a series of footprints stretched for miles. Not the random wanderings of solitary giants, but the parallel paths of multiple sauropods moving in unison. Herds implied coordination, communication, perhaps even hierarchies. A lone sauropod might blunder through the landscape, but a herd needed leaders, sentinels, a shared understanding of migration routes. Then there were the nests. In Montana's Egg Mountain, paleontologists uncovered a vast nesting ground of Maiasaura, good mother lizard. The site was littered with egg clutches arranged in precise circles, their spacing suggesting careful incubation. More telling were the fossilized juveniles, their bones showing signs of prolonged growth in the nest. These dinosaurs didn't just lay eggs and abandon them, they nurtured their young, possibly bringing food like modern birds. But the most tantalizing evidence came from injuries. A triceratops frill, unearthed in South Dakota, bore a healed bite mark that matched the jaws of a Tyrannosaurus. The wound had sealed cleanly, meaning the horned dinosaur had survived the attack and lived for months or years afterward. Such fossils hinted at more than brute survival. They suggested care. Did herbivores protect their wounded? Did predators learn which prey to avoid? Theropods like Troodon pushed the boundaries further. With stereoscopic vision and opposable fingers, these predators likely had depth perception and dexterity unmatched by other dinosaurs. Some paleontologists speculated they hunted in packs, their large eyes giving them an advantage in low light. A fossilized Deinonychus attack site in Utah showed multiple individuals surrounding a Tyrannosaurus, their coordinated assault reminiscent of modern wolves. Yet intelligence is a spectrum. The colossal sauropods, with their tiny brains relative to body size, may have relied more on instinct than innovation. But even they likely possessed a basic awareness of their surroundings, recognizing landmarks, remembering seasonal food sources, or communicating through low-frequency rumbles like elephants. And then there were the outliers. Anchiornis, a feathered dinosaur from the Jurassic, left behind not just bones, but melanosomes that revealed its striking plumage. Such vivid colors rarely evolve without purpose. Were they for camouflage, courtship, species recognition? The answer could reshape our understanding of dinosaur perception, of how they saw each other, and perhaps how they thought. The puzzle is far from complete. Without living dinosaurs to observe, scientists must rely on scars in stone, on the spacing of teeth in a jaw, on the hollows where brains once pulsed with thought. But each fossil is a whisper from the past, hinting at minds that navigated a world we can only reconstruct in fragments. They were not mammals, not birds, not reptiles as we know them. They were something else entirely, an experiment in cognition shaped by millions of years of trials and errors, successes and extinctions. And in their bones lies a truth both humbling and exhilarating. Intelligence, in all its forms, is older than we ever imagined. The air tasted of ash. For weeks the skies had darkened, the sun reduced to a sullen red ember behind a veil of fine, choking dust. The forests, once vibrant with the calls of hadrosaurs and the rustle of feathered theropods, now stood silent, their leaves withering under an unrelenting pall of grey. The rivers ran sluggish, their waters tainted with a metallic tang, and the carcasses of fish floated belly up in the shallows. Something was wrong with the world. The first signs had been subtle. In the months before the skies turned, the herds grew restless. Triceratops, normally methodical grazers, abandoned their usual migration routes, their low, uneasy bellows echoing across the plains. Edmontosaurus mothers, usually vigilant over their young, seemed distracted, their eyes scanning the horizon as if sensing a threat they couldn't name. Even the predators were uneasy. Tyrannosaurus, its keen senses attuned to the slightest shift, stalked the edges of the thinning herds with an uncharacteristic wariness. Then came the tremors. The earth shuddered in fits and starts, subtle at first, then building into violent spasms that split the soil and sent boulders tumbling from cliffs. The dinosaurs, creatures of instinct, reacted with confusion. Some fled blindly, their massive frames crashing through the undergrowth. Others huddled low, their bodies pressed to the ground as if trying to steady a world that would not stop shaking. And then, fire. From the far south, where the land met the sea, a glow erupted on the horizon. Not the familiar flicker of lightning strikes, but something vaster, more terrible. The volcanoes of the Deccan Traps, dormant for millennia, had awakened. Fissures split the earth like wounds, vomiting forth rivers of molten rock that blackened the soil and set the forests ablaze. The air filled with the stench of sulfur and burning resin, the heat so intense that even miles away, the bark of trees bubbled and split. Ash rained down in thick, suffocating sheets, coating the frills of Triceratops and the feathers of Dakotaraptor alike. The dinosaurs had endured ice ages, droughts, even the slow creep of continental drift. But this was different. This was a world unraveling. The herbivores suffered first. The ferns and flowering plants, their leaves smothered under ash, wilted and died. Ankylosaurus, its armored body impervious to predators, had no defense against starvation. It lumbered through the poisoned landscape, its club tail dragging, until its legs gave out, and it collapsed beside the skeletons of its kin. The predators lingered longer. Tyrannosaurus, its metabolism a furnace of need, rampaged through the dying forests, its once mighty frame shrinking under its sagging skin. Desperate, it turned on the weak and the young, even its own kind. Fossilized bite marks on T-Rex bones would one day tell the story of those last, brutal days. Cannibalism in the shadow of extinction. And all the while, the earth kept burning. The volcanoes showed no mercy. Each eruption pumped more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, more sulfur dioxide to blot out the sun. The planet's delicate balance tilted, and the climate, once so stable, swung wildly between extremes. Acid rain scoured the land, turning rivers corrosive. The oceans, absorbing the excess carbon, grew more acidic, their delicate ecosystems collapsing. Yet even in the chaos, life clung on. Small mammals, their burrows deep and insulated, emerged at night to scavenge the carcasses of giants. Birds, the last feathered dinosaurs, took refuge in the highest branches, their songs replaced by an eerie silence. Crocodiles, ancient survivors of countless catastrophes, slid into the murky waters and waited. But the age of giants was ending. The reign of Tyrannosaurus, of Triceratops, of Ankylosaurus, millions of years of dominance, was crumbling in a matter of decades. The world they had known, the world they had ruled, was vanishing before their eyes. And the worst was yet to come. Far beyond the smoke and fire, beyond the reach of even the tallest sauropod's gaze, a second catastrophe streaked through the void, a shadow growing larger with each passing day. The dinosaurs' time was running out. The asteroid struck with the force of 1 billion atomic bombs. In an instant, the sky turned white, a flash of searing light that ignited everything it touched. The impact, centered near what would one day be the Yucatan Peninsula, vaporized rock, water, and life alike. A shockwave radiated outward, flattening forests for thousands of miles. The very air caught fire as superheated debris rained back down, turning the atmosphere into an oven. The dinosaurs never saw it coming. Tyrannosaurus, its ribs stark beneath its ragged hide, had just clamped its jaws around the throat of a dying Edmontosaurus when the world exploded. The blast incinerated them both, their bones reduced to charcoal in seconds. Triceratops herds, already weakened by famine, were swept away in a wall of scorching wind, their massive bodies tossed like leaves. Then came the darkness. The dust and soot from the impact and the raging volcanoes blotted out the sun. Day turned to perpetual twilight, the temperature plummeting as the planet plunged into a nuclear winter. Photosynthesis ground to a halt. The last surviving plants withered. Starvation swept the land like a second wave of death. The seas fared no better. The great marine reptiles, Mosasaurus, Elasmosaurus, Plesiosaurus, had already been struggling with acidifying waters. Now, the sudden drop in sunlight killed the phytoplankton at the base of the food chain. The oceans became graveyards, their surfaces choked with the carcasses of fish and ammonites. Even the mighty Leviathan, a predator that had ruled for millions of years, sank, here is the script with the symbols removed, into the abyss, its body dissolving in the anoxic deep. Only the small endured. Mammals, their burrows shielding them from the worst of the heat and cold, emerged to a world stripped bare. They gnawed on roots, on insects, on the bones of the fallen giants. Birds, their feathers insulating them from the chill, scavenged what they could before retreating to the shelter of caves. Crocodiles, their metabolism slow and their appetites patient, waited in the dwindling rivers for the rare prey that stumbled too close. The long winter lasted for years. When the skies finally cleared, the world that emerged was unrecognizable. The great forests were gone, replaced by fields of ferns and hardy shrubs. The rivers had carved new paths through the ashen wasteland. And the dinosaurs, the thunderous, magnificent rulers of the earth, were no more. Only their bones remained, half buried in the mud, silent witnesses to the end of an era. But life, as it always does, found a way. From the shadows, the mammals crept forth. The birds took to the skies. The world, though scarred, was ripe for new beginnings. The age of giants was over. The age of survivors had begun. The world was silent. No thunderous footsteps shook the earth. No bellowing calls echoed across the plains. The forests stood still, their branches heavy with ash, their leaves untouched by the grazing mouths of titans. The rivers, once churned by the passage of armored herds, now ran clear and undisturbed. The dinosaurs were gone. In their absence, the planet seemed to hold its breath. The air, thick with the lingering scent of charred wood and damp soil, carried no hint of the great beasts that had once ruled. The skies, once patrolled by pterosaurs and early birds, stretched empty and vast. Yet life, in its quiet tenacity, endured. Small mammals, their fur matted with dust, emerged from their burrows under the pale light of a sun still struggling to pierce the haze. They sniffed the air, whiskers twitching, their dark eyes scanning the wasteland for signs of food. The carcasses of the fallen giants had long since been picked clean, but the earth offered other sustenance. Buried seeds, hardy insects, the tender shoots of ferns pushing through the ash. Birds, the last heirs of the theropods, flitted between skeletal trees, their songs tentative in the eerie quiet. Some still bore the colors of their ancestors, flashes of iridescent feathers, hints of crimson and gold, but their world had shrunk. No longer did they share the skies with winged reptiles. Now they were the only masters of the air. The oceans, though stripped of their great marine reptiles, teemed with smaller survivors. Fish darted through the shallows, their scales glinting in the thin sunlight. Crustaceans scuttled over the bones of mosasaurs half buried in the silt. The tides, unchallenged by the bulk of plesiosaurs, lapped gently at the shores. But the scars of extinction ran deep. The once mighty forests of the Cretaceous had been reduced to charred stumps and struggling saplings. The great river systems, altered by the cataclysm, carved new paths through the ashen plains. The very soil had been transformed, enriched by the decay of countless fallen giants, yet poisoned by the lingering toxins of the asteroid's impact. And yet, a fern unfurled its fronds in the hollow of a shattered triceratops skull. A beetle, its carapace gleaming like polished onyx, crawled across the curve of a Tyrannosaurus rib. A stream, cutting through the mud, whispered over the teeth of a mosasaurus, washing them clean. The world was wounded, but not dead. In the shadows, in the cracks, in the stubborn green tendrils pushing through the wreckage, life persisted. The mammals, once mere spectators to the age of dinosaurs, now ventured further, their numbers growing with each passing season. The birds diversified, their beaks adapting to new diets, their wings carrying them to untouched refuges. The planet was healing, but it would never be the same. The age of giants had ended in fire and darkness. The age of survivors had only just begun. And somewhere, in the depths of time, the first whispers of a new world, one of fur and feathers, of grasping hands and curious minds, were stirring. The dinosaurs were gone, but their legacy, written in stone and blood and bone, would echo forever. The world after the dinosaurs was a quieter place, but not silent. High in the skeletal branches of the recovering forests, a new song began to rise. It started as a tentative chirp, then swelled into trills and warbles, a symphony of survival. These were the birds, the last feathered dinosaurs, and they were inheriting the Earth. Their story began long before the asteroid struck. Hidden in the shadows of giants like Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, small winged theropods had flitted between the trees for millions of years. Archaeopteryx, with its blend of reptilian teeth and avian feathers, was just the beginning. By the late Cretaceous, birds had already diversified into a dazzling array of forms, some toothless like modern sparrows, others like Hesperornis, sleek divers with powerful legs and razor-sharp beaks for catching fish. But the KPG extinction changed everything. With the skies emptied of pterosaurs and the forests stripped of their largest predators, birds found themselves in a world of opportunity. Those that survived the cataclysm, small, adaptable, and often seed-eating, exploited niches left vacant by the vanished giants. Vegavis, a duck-like bird from Antarctica, left behind fossilized evidence of complex vocal organs, suggesting that even in the aftermath, birds were already singing. Their melodies, unheard for 66 million years, may have been the first music of the Cenozoic. As the decades passed and the planet healed, birds diversified at an astonishing rate. Some, like the terror birds of South America, grew large and predatory, their hooked beaks capable of tearing flesh. Others, like the early ancestors of hummingbirds, evolved to sip nectar from the flowers that now dominated the landscape. The skies, once ruled by leathery-winged pterosaurs, now belonged to feathered aeronauts, some with wingspans rivaling eagles, others as tiny as finches. But birds did more than just survive, they thrived. Their hollow bones, inherited from dinosaur ancestors, made them efficient flyers. Their feathers, once mere insulation, now allowed for dazzling displays of color and courtship. Some developed intricate mating dances, their plumage shimmering in the sunlight. Others, like the early penguins, traded flight for swimming, their wings evolving into flippers perfect for gliding through the oceans. And then came the songbirds. By the time the first true primates climbed into the trees, birds had already mastered the air, the water, and even the art of mimicry. Their brains, compact but highly developed, allowed for problem-solving, memory, and even play. A crow-like bird from the Eocene, Primosens, left behind tools made of twigs, evidence that intelligence was not solely the domain of mammals. Today, their legacy surrounds us. The sparrow outside your window, the eagle soaring over mountains, the penguin diving through icy waters. They are all dinosaurs, refined by time and catastrophe into creatures of exquisite beauty and resilience. The asteroid that ended the age of giants could not extinguish them. For the birds are the dinosaurs, not their descendants, but their living continuation. Their songs are the echoes of a lost world, their wings the last banners of the Mesozoic, and they are still writing their story. The dinosaurs were gone, but their shadows lingered everywhere. In the trembling fronds of a fern, in the coiled shell of a nautilus, in the distant cry of a hawk, traces of the Mesozoic whispered across the eons. The world had moved on, reshaped by catastrophe and time, yet the legacy of those vanished giants was etched into the very fabric of life. Take the crocodiles. Lurking in murky rivers and sun-baked swamps, they were the last true contemporaries of the dinosaurs. Their armored bodies, their watchful eyes, their patient ambush-hunting strategies, all relics of a shared ancestry. When a crocodile slid beneath the water's surface, it moved with the same stealth that its Jurassic ancestors had used to evade Allosaurus. Its nest, guarded with a mother's fierce devotion, echoed the nesting grounds of Maiasaura. Crocodiles were not dinosaurs, but they were kin, the final torchbearers of a lineage that had once ruled both land and water. Then there were the birds. Every sparrow, every eagle, every hummingbird was a living dinosaur. Their feathers and hollow bones a direct inheritance from theropod ancestors. The way a crow tilted its head to study a puzzle, the way an ostrich sprinted across the plains, these were behaviors coded in the age of Velociraptor. Even their songs, complex and haunting, might have had precursors in the Cretaceous, where feathered dinosaurs called to mates or warned of danger. But the ghosts were not just in flesh and bone. They lived in human imagination. Long before science gave them names, dinosaurs haunted our myths. The dragons of Europe, with their serpentine bodies and fiery breath, might have been born from fossilized bones mistaken for monsters. The roc of Arabian legend, a bird so vast it could carry off elephants, could have been inspired by the towering Argentavis, a Miocene predator with a wingspan of 25 feet. Proof that birds, too, had once reached monstrous sizes. Even the landscapes bore their mark. The chalk cliffs of Dover, the badlands of Montana, the fossil-rich quarries of China, all were archives of the Mesozoic. their layers preserving the footprints of creatures long gone. A child skipping a stone across a river might send it bouncing over bedrock that had once been trodden by triceratops. A farmer's plough could unearth the tooth of a mosasaurus, its serrated edge still sharp after 66 million years. And then there were the absences. The great graveyards of the Morrison Formation, where Stegosaurus and Apatosaurus lay entombed together, spoke of ecosystems lost. The Hell Creek fossils, with their jumbled bones of T-Rex and Edmontosaurus, told of an ending written in fire and darkness. These were not just relics, they were tombstones, memorials to a world that had vanished in the blink of a geologic eye. Yet in vanishing, the dinosaurs had left room for new dreams. Their extinction had cleared the stage for mammals, small, scrappy survivors who would one day give rise to primates, to hominids, to us. In a way, we owed them everything. Without their fall, our rise might never have come, and so we remember them. In museums, where reconstructed skeletons tower over awed visitors, in films, where their roars shake theaters, in the quiet of a paleontologist's lab, where a single tooth can unlock volumes of lost history. The dinosaurs are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their ghosts walk with us, in the rustle of leaves, in the flight of a bird, in the stories we tell of monsters and marvels. And perhaps in some distant future, another species will walk among our fossils, wondering at the creatures who once ruled this blue-green world. The Mesozoic is over, but its echoes, they will never fade. The cliffs of Lyme Regis groaned under the weight of the storm. Waves, grey and frothing, clawed at the rocks, their salt-laced spray stinging the face of the lone figure hunched against the wind. Mary Anning, barely 20 and already weathered beyond her years, tightened her shawl against the chill and squinted at the exposed strata. The rain had washed away layers of mud, revealing something strange, a curve of bone, smooth and dark, embedded in the stone. She knew that shape. Her fingers, calloused from a lifetime of chiseling, traced the outline. This was no ordinary rock. It was a vertebra, massive and ancient, part of a creature lost to time. Mary had been hunting fossils since childhood, scouring the cliffs with her brother after their father's death left the family destitute. The townsfolk called her curiosities dragon bones and paid pennies for them, never guessing their true significance. But Mary knew better. These were not myths. They were real. She struck her chisel against the rock, the sharp tink of metal on stone lost in the howl of the wind. Piece by painstaking piece the creature emerged, a long, sinuous spine, ribs like the arches of a cathedral, a skull with eye sockets as large as her fists. It was unlike anything she had seen before. A voice shouted over the gale, "Mary, the tide!" She glanced at the sea. The waves were creeping closer, their hungry fingers reaching for the cliff base. One misstep, and the fossil and she would be swallowed by the rising water. "Just a little longer!" she yelled back, driving her chisel deeper. The bone resisted, then cracked free. She staggered back, clutching her prize to her chest as the first wave slammed into the rocks below, spraying her with icy brine. By the time she reached the safety of the shore, her hands were numb, her skirts soaked through. But none of that mattered. She cradled the fossil like a child, her breath coming fast. This was no dragon. This was something science had no name for, and she would be the one to give it one. Author's note: this chapter introduces Mary Anning, one of the first great fossil hunters, whose discoveries in the early 19th century revolutionized our understanding of prehistoric life. The creature she uncovers here is likely an ichthyosaur, though in her time it was a mystery waiting to be solved. The great bone wars had begun. In the dusty badlands of the American West, two men stood at the center of a rivalry that would define paleontology for decades. Edward Drinker Cope, his beard streaked with trail dust, crouched beside a partially exposed vertebra, his fingers trembling with excitement. A few miles away, Othniel Charles Marsh adjusted his spectacles and scowled at the telegram in his hand. News of yet another Cope discovery. The race to name new species had turned into an all-out battle. Cope worked with frenetic energy, his team blasting through rock with dynamite, their haste leaving fossils shattered in the process. He sketched his finds by firelight, his journals crammed with hastily scribbled names: Camarasaurus, Dryptosaurus, Chelophysis, each one a victory over Marsh. But Marsh had resources Cope could only dream of. Backed by Yale and the deep pockets of his uncle George Peabody, he hired scouts to shadow Cope's expeditions, bribing workers to reveal the locations of new finds. When Cope unveiled Elasmosaurus, Marsh publicly humiliated him, pointing out in The American Naturalist that Cope had placed the skull on the wrong end of the skeleton. The feud spiraled into sabotage. Marsh's men salted dig sites with worthless bones to waste Cope's time. Cope, in turn, bought up Marsh's fossil suppliers, cutting off his rivals' access to fresh specimens. They fought over everything, from the classification of Triceratops, Marsh's discovery, to the validity of Cope's tiny Nanosaurus. Science suffered in the crossfire. Dozens of fossils were damaged in their rush to outpace one another. Some species were named twice, once by each man, leading to decades of confusion. A train car full of Marsh's priceless specimens burned under suspicious circumstances, while Cope nearly bankrupted himself trying to outspend his rival. Yet for all their pettiness, their discoveries reshaped the world. Before Cope and Marsh, dinosaurs were seen as sluggish, cold-blooded monsters. But the sheer diversity of their finds, the towering Apatosaurus, the predator Allosaurus, the armored Stegosaurus, painted a new picture. A dynamic, complex world where creatures adapted, competed, and thrived. The Bone Wars ended as bitterly as they began. Cope died in 1897, his body donated to science in one final jab at Marsh. He insisted his brain be measured against his rivals, certain it would prove his superiority. It didn't. Marsh, though victorious in wealth and titles, spent his final years discredited by earlier errors, his reputation crumbling like the fragile fossils he'd once prized. But their legacy endured. The names they coined still echo in textbooks. The museums they filled still awe generations. And the fever they ignited, the desperate, glorious hunt for lost worlds, still burns in every paleontologist who cracks open stone and wonders, what if? The Bone Wars were madness, but from that madness we found giants. The fossil record is a puzzle missing half its pieces. For every skeleton mounted in museum halls, there are gaps, whole lineages that vanish without explanation, creatures that defy classification, and evolutionary leaps that seem to happen overnight. These are the unsolved mysteries of paleontology, the blank spaces where science meets speculation. Take the missing links. The transition from fish to tetrapod is one of evolution's greatest leaps, yet the fossil record offers only fleeting glimpses. Tiktaalik, with its fish-like fins and wrist-like bones, bridges some of the gap. But what came before? What strange, lobe-finned creature first dragged itself onto land? And why? The rocks from that critical period remain stubbornly silent. Then there are the enigmas. Hallucigenia, that spiny, worm-like creature from the Cambrian, spent decades reconstructed upside down before scientists corrected its orientation. But even now, its place in the tree of life is debated. Was it an ancestor of velvet worms, a bizarre offshoot of arthropods, or something else entirely, a failed experiment in body plans lost to time? And what of Tanistrophaeus? This Triassic reptile's neck stretched longer than its body and tail combined, a preposterous length that defies easy explanation. Did it fish from shores like a heron, lurk in underwater crevices, waiting for prey? Fossils show its vertebrae were reinforced, but how it lived, and why evolution favored such extremes, remains a riddle. The oceans hold their own secrets. The Tully monster, Tullimonstrum, a soft-bodied oddity from Illinois' Maison Creek, resembles nothing else in Earth's history. Was it a vertebrate? A mollusk? Its bizarre proboscis and stalked eyes suggest a creature out of nightmare, yet it thrived in its carboniferous lagoons. Without modern analogues, scientists can only guess at its behavior. Even the dinosaurs have their holes. Where are the small early tyrannosaurs? The fossil record skips from tiny feathered predators like Dilong straight to giants like T-Rex, leaving a 20-million-year gap in their evolution. Did they lurk in upland environments where fossils rarely form? Or were their bones simply lost to time? And then there are the ghosts, species we know existed only by their absence. The first flowering plants left no immediate ancestors. The sudden appearance of bees in the Cretaceous hints at co-evolution with flowers. But where are the intermediaries? Similarly, the ancestors of whales transitioned from land to sea in a geological blink, yet key fossils from their amphibious phase remain elusive. These gaps are not failures of science, but invitations. Every missing link is a challenge to dig deeper, to question assumptions, to imagine the impossible. For in the silence between fossils lies the thrill of discovery, the chance that the next hammer strike, the next brushstroke, will reveal a piece of the puzzle we never knew was missing. The mysteries endure, and so does the hunt. The jungle was thick with whispers. Deep in the Congo basin, where the trees grew so close their roots intertwined like sleeping serpents, the locals spoke of a creature older than time. Mokalembembe, they called it, a beast with a long neck, a tail like a crocodile, and a body the size of an elephant. To scientists, it was a myth. But myths, as the fossil record had shown, often carried echoes of truth. Could some dinosaurs have survived? The idea was heresy in most academic circles. The KPG extinction had been absolute: fire, darkness, starvation. And yet, there were gaps in the story. Islands, for one. When the asteroid struck, fragments of land like New Zealand and Madagascar had already drifted into isolation. Could small, hardy dinosaurs, feathered theropods perhaps, or tiny ornithischians, have clung to existence in these refuges? The fossil record was silent, but absence was not proof. Then there were the deep forests. The Amazon, the Congo, the rainforests of Southeast Asia. These were places where sunlight barely touched the ground, where new species were discovered every year. In such vastness, could a population of small, elusive dinosaurs have persisted, their numbers dwindling but never vanishing? The Komodo dragon, a relic of the Pleistocene, had survived in isolation. Why not others? The oceans held darker possibilities. The coelacanth, a fish thought extinct for 66 million years, had been hauled alive from the depths off South Africa in 1938. If a creature so ancient could evade detection, what else might lurk in the unexplored trenches? The Mosasaurus were gone, yes, but their smaller, deep-diving relatives? Even the fossil record itself hinted at anomalies. In 2018, a team in Montana uncovered a Triceratops horn dated to after the extinction event. The margin of error was slim, but the implications were staggering. Had a handful survived the cataclysm, their lineage flickering out in generations rather than days? And then there were the stories. Not just Moklembembe, but the Emelantuka of Central Africa, said to resemble a Ceratosaurus. The Mbielu its back studded with triangular plates like a stegosaur. The ropen of Papua New Guinea, a winged creature that carried the ghostly silhouette of a pterosaur. Folklore, of course. But folklore had roots. The earth was vast, its secrets legion. For every discovery, 100 mysteries remained. The jungles, the oceans, the uncharted caves, they held shadows that science had yet to illuminate. Perhaps the dinosaurs were truly gone. But perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere in the green heart of the world, a last survivor stirred, its breath a whisper against the leaves, its footsteps lost in the thunder of the rain. The age of giants had ended. But in the quiet places, between myth and memory, their echoes lingered. Waiting, watching, forgotten, but not extinct. For centuries, dinosaurs were depicted in drab greys and greens, lifeless statues of stone rather than the vibrant creatures they once were. But in a quiet lab in Bristol, England, a scientist named Jakob Winther held a fossilized feather up to the light and saw something extraordinary. Microscopic structures preserved for 150 million years shimmered like tiny prisms. These were melanosomes, organelles that once held pigments, and they held the key to reconstructing the colors of the past. The process was painstaking. Under an electron microscope, the fossilized melanosomes revealed their shapes, round for reddish-brown hues, elongated for blacks and greys. By comparing them to those in modern bird feathers, Winther's team mapped the plumage of Anchiornis, a small feathered dinosaur from the Jurassic. The result was startling. A slate-grey body, white wing stripes, and a fiery red crest. A far cry from the dull reptiles of old textbooks. But feathers weren't the only canvas. Some dinosaurs wore their colors in skin. Psittacosaurus, a parrot-beaked herbivore, left behind fossilized skin with preserved melanin patterns, a counter-shaded body, dark on top, light underneath, that hinted at a life spent hiding in dappled forests. Even the mighty Borealopelta, an armored nodosaur, bore reddish-brown pigments, its bulk camouflaged against the Cretaceous undergrowth. Then came the iridescence. A microraptor fossil from China revealed melanosomes arranged like those in modern starlings, a sign of glossy, shimmering feathers that flashed black and blue in the sunlight. This wasn't just camouflage. It was display, courtship, a language of color lost to time. But the most haunting discovery lay in the eyes. Fossilized sclerotic rings, bony structures that supported the eyes of dinosaurs and birds, suggested activity patterns. Large rings, like those in Velociraptor, hinted at night hunters. Smaller ones, like Triceratops, pointed to daytime grazers. And in rare cases, preserved retinal tissues revealed pupils, vertical slits for ambush predators, round ones for active chasers. The Mesozoic world, once imagined in monochrome, now blazed with color. Striped tails, iridescent throats, eyes that gleamed like polished amber in the dawn light. Science had not just rebuilt the bones of dinosaurs, it had brought them back to life. Authors note, modern techniques from melanosome analysis to laser-stimulated fluorescence continue to revolutionize our understanding of prehistoric colors. The past was never dull. It was a canvas of survival, rivalry, and beauty, waiting for us to decode its hues. The wind through the cycads was a whisper, a dry rustle of stiff fronds brushing against one another in the humid air. Somewhere in the dense undergrowth, a cricket-like insect chirped, a high, rhythmic pulse that had gone unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. But beneath these familiar sounds, the Mesozoic world thrummed with voices long lost to time. The dinosaurs were not silent. In the early morning mist, a Parasaurolophus herd stirred. The males, their long, curved crests hollow like the pipes of an organ, filled the air with deep, resonant calls. The sound travelled through the crest's chambers, amplifying into low, haunting notes that rolled across the floodplain. To a distant predator, it was a warning. We are many. We are strong. To a potential mate, it was a song, a declaration of fitness in a world where sound could mean survival. Nearby, a pair of Cretaceous answered, their shorter, helmet-like crests producing higher, fluting tones. The calls wove together, a prehistoric symphony of bass and treble, carrying for miles over the open landscape. But not all dinosaurs relied on crests. In the dense fern thickets, a velociraptor pack communicated in sharp, guttural clicks and hisses. Their vocal range was limited compared to the hadrosaurs, but their sounds were precise. Signals for hunting, for warning, for coordinating an ambush. A fossilized hyoid bone, discovered in a close relative, suggested some theropods may have possessed the anatomy for more complex vocalizations, perhaps even bird-like squawks. And then there were the giants. Tyrannosaurus, lacking the elaborate crests of herbivores, may have relied on sheer volume. Its deep, infrasound rumbles, frequencies too low for human ears, could have traveled through the ground, vibrating the bones of prey and rival alike. A single roar might have shaken the leaves from the trees, a physical force as much as a sound. But the Mesozoic soundscape was more than just dinosaur calls. Pterosaurs shrieked as they wheeled above lagoons, their voices echoing off the water. Crocodilians, already ancient by the Cretaceous, bellowed from the rivers, their throats producing the same primal growls their descendants would use millions of years later. Frogs croaked in the marshes, their chorus unchanged since the first amphibians ventured onto land. Even the plants contributed. The breeze through the needles of ancient conifers was a softer whisper than the rustle of flowering leaves, a sound that would not evolve until the Cretaceous. The creak of towering sequoias, the splash of water dripping from giant ferns. These were the background notes of a world without human noise. Then, at dusk, the world grew stranger still. In the dimming light, the first fireflies flickered to life, their bioluminescent pulses silent but mesmerizing. Beetles buzzed, their wing beats a drone beneath the occasional hoot of an owl-like Archaeopteryx. And from the shadows, the mammals added their tiny voices, chitters, squeaks, the occasional warning hiss as they navigated a world ruled by giants. The Mesozoic was never silent. It was a world of creaks and roars, of songs and clicks, of vibrations felt through the earth as much as heard. Some sounds, like the crunch of a predator's footsteps or the snap of a breaking branch, meant danger. Others, like the murmur of a nesting Maiasaura to her young, spoke of bonds older than time itself. We will never truly know these sounds, but in the wind through the pines, in the rumble of distant thunder, in the low note of a foghorn echoing across a bay, perhaps, if we listen closely, we can still hear their ghosts. The Mesozoic is gone, but its echoes remain. The dinosaurs were gone, but their fingerprints remained everywhere. They had shaped the world in ways both profound and subtle, their 165-million-year reign leaving an indelible mark on the planet. The forests they browsed, the rivers they crossed, even the air they breathed, all bore the echoes of their passage. Take the soil beneath our feet. The great sauropods, with their insatiable appetites, had been the first true gardeners of the earth. Their constant grazing thinned dense thickets, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor and fostering new growth. Their dung, rich with undigested seeds, spread plant life across continents. Modern ecosystems still function on these ancient rhythms, herbivores shaping vegetation, predators culling the weak, carcasses nourishing the earth. The dinosaurs had written the first draft of these cycles, and every creature since had followed their blueprint. Even the chalk cliffs of Dover owed their existence to dinosaurs. The white cliffs were built from the compressed remains of coccolithophores, tiny marine algae that flourished in the Cretaceous seas. But those seas had been enriched by runoff from lands where dinosaurs roamed, their decaying bodies and waste cycling nutrients into the water. The chalk was more than rock. It was the literal bedrock of the Mesozoic, a monument to an age when reptiles ruled both land and sea. And then there were the birds. They were not just descendants of dinosaurs, they were dinosaurs, the last surviving theropods. Their feathers, their hollow bones, even the way they tilted their heads to study the world, all were inherited from ancestors like Velociraptor and Archaeopteryx. The songs of sparrows, the dive of an eagle, the iridescent shimmer of a hummingbird's throat. These were the final verses of a saga that began with the first feathered hunters stalking Jurassic undergrowth. But the dinosaurs' legacy went deeper than biology. They shaped human imagination long before we knew their names. The dragons of myth, from the serpentine worms of Europe to the feathered long of China, bore uncanny resemblances to creatures we would only uncover in fossils centuries later. The griffin, with its beak and talons, might have been inspired by protoceratops skeletons weathering out of the Gobi Desert. Even our nightmares of monsters, great, scaly beasts with teeth like daggers, were inherited from ancestral memories of a time when such creatures truly walked the earth. And then there was the lesson of their end. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs was a reminder of life's fragility, that even the mightiest dynasties could fall to cosmic chance. Their extinction paved the way for mammals, for primates, for us. But it also served as a warning. Dominance is temporary. The world does not belong to any species forever. Today, we walk in their footsteps. The coal that powers our cities is the compressed remains of Jurassic forests. The oil fueling our engines is the liquid residue of Mesozoic oceans. Even the limestone in our buildings was once the shells of creatures that swam alongside Mosasaurus. We have built our civilization on the bones of giants. And perhaps in some distant future, another species will sift through our fossils, marveling at the fleeting reign of the hairless apes who briefly inherited the earth. The dinosaurs' time is over, but their story is written in stone, in feather, in the very air we breathe. They were the architects of the modern world. And though they are gone, they are not forgotten. Their legacy is the planet itself. The night was vast, the stars cold and distant. Standing on a cliff's edge, the wind tugging at his coat, Dr. Elias Carter let his gaze drift over the badlands below, a sea of eroded rock, its layers exposed like the pages of an ancient book. 65 million years ago, this had been a swamp, thick with ferns and alive with the bellowing of triceratops herds. 200 million years before that, a desert where the first dinosaurs left their three-toed prints in the sand. Further back still, a shallow sea where trilobites scuttled and Dunkleosteus prowled. Time folded in his mind like origami, epochs collapsing into moments. He knelt, brushing his fingers over a fossilized ripple mark, the ghost of a wave from a Jurassic shore. How many lives had passed since that ripple froze in stone? How many extinctions? How many rebirths? The earth remembered them all, its memory written in strata and bone. A meteorite fragment rested in his pocket, its surface pitted from its plunge through the atmosphere. He turned it over in his palm, feeling its weight. This tiny rock had witnessed the birth of the solar system, the slow dance of planets, the fiery impact that ended the Cretaceous. It was older than mountains, older than oceans. And he, Elias Carter, was a flicker. A human lifespan was a breath against the geologic clock. The pyramids were built yesterday, the last ice age the day before. The entirety of human civilization could fit into the Cretaceous 1,000 times over and still leave room for epochs unnamed. Yet here he stood, a thinking, feeling fragment of the universe, alive just long enough to trace the contours of deep time before vanishing into it. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Somewhere in the canyon, a nighthawk called, its cry echoing off the rocks. The sound would fade, just as the roars of Tyrannosaurus had faded, just as the chirps of Archaeopteryx had dissolved into silence. But the earth endured. It would spin on after Elias was dust, after the cities crumbled, after new species rose and fell. Continents would drift, mountains would weather to sand, and perhaps, in some distant age, another creature would crouch in the dirt, puzzling over the fossils humans left behind. The thought should have filled him with despair. Instead, it brought a strange peace. He was part of something vaster than himself, a story that had begun with stardust and would end, billions of years hence, when the dying sun swelled to swallow the world. His existence was a comma in that narrative, brief, but not insignificant. Elias placed the meteorite on a flat stone, a offering to time itself. Then he stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and walked back to camp, his boots scuffing tracks that would vanish by morning. Above him, the Milky Way stretched across the sky, its light older than bones, older than stone. The dream of deep time was not a nightmare of insignificance. It was a lullaby, a reminder that all things, even stars, must pass. And in passing, make room for what comes next. The fossil lay cradled in the rock like a secret. Emma's fingers trembled as she brushed away the last layer of sediment, revealing the delicate curve of a jawbone. Tiny, fragile, yet unmistakable. The teeth, needle-sharp and perfectly preserved, told her everything. This was no reptile. This was a mammal, and it had lived alongside the dinosaurs. The desert sun beat down on her back, but she barely felt it. All her attention was fixed on the fossil, on the story it whispered across 70 million years. I was here, it seemed to say. I survived. The bone was smaller than her thumb, a relic of a creature that had scurried in the shadows of giants. Its name, when she confirmed it, would be something like Chimexomis, an early rodent-like mammal, one of the countless tiny survivors that had outlasted the asteroid, the fires, the endless winter. Emma traced the outline of the jaw, her mind painting the world this creature had known. The air thick with ash, the forests reduced to smouldering stumps, the eerie silence where once the earth had trembled under the footsteps of titans. And yet this little mammal had endured. It had burrowed, it had adapted, it had waited. And when the dust cleared, it had stepped into a world emptied of kings. Her colleague, Mark, crouched beside her, his shadow falling across the rock. Find something? Emma didn't look up. A whisper. She said softly. Mark leaned closer, his breath catching as he saw the fossil. That's the other side of the extinction, she finished. They worked in silence after that, painstakingly chiseling the rock away from the bone. The fossil was perfect, untouched by scavengers or time. Even the molars were intact, their cusps designed for grinding seeds, or maybe insects, whatever it could find in those first desperate years after the end. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma sat back, her hands dusty but careful as she lifted the fossil free. It weighed almost nothing. A breath, a heartbeat, a life that had bridged two worlds. She imagined it scurrying through the undergrowth, its tiny paws quick and sure, its nose twitching at the scent of rain on the wind. The dinosaurs were gone, but the Earth was still alive, still breathing, still growing, still offering chances to those small enough to take them. Back at camp, under the glow of a lantern, Emma wrapped the fossil in tissue paper, her touch reverent. This was more than just a specimen. It was a message, a reminder that extinction was not the end, that life, no matter how fragile, always found a way, and that sometimes the quietest voices, the ones that spoke in bones and dust, were the ones that echoed loudest across the ages. The desert night stretched above her, vast and star-strewn. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote yipped, its cry carrying over the rocks. Emma smiled. The past was not dead. It was just waiting to be heard.